Yeah, I mean, something that I learned over my time, and I guess it was just something I did back in the day too, is that the subconscious mind is always listening, right? So whether you're thinking positive or whether you're thinking negative thoughts, it's always sort of listening. So in terms of a mindset and being consistent, we always got to kind of put ourselves in a positive direction. And then, like you said, visualizing is a big part of that. But I think that I want to sort of really lean into the fact that like people are always sort of coming at me like, hey, what's the secret, like what's the magic thing that's going to make me play good? And like I have some things, but I tried a ton of stuff before I figured out what exactly worked for me in the morning, in the middle of the day, in the afternoon, food, everything. And I think people really got to go out there and just be willing to experiment a bit. And like you said, collect some data, take note of how you feel, both mentally and physically, and sort of create something and write it down and keep note of it, whether it's in a journal or whatever, and stick to that. Because when you get to pro hockey, right, like winning matters, playing good matters sort of every night, right? We want to try and find that consistency. And I think that when you're younger and you're playing amateur, right, like all that time is supposed to be spent developing. It's supposed to be spent perfecting those routines, perfecting, those things that sort of get you ready that you can lean on, when the time comes. So um, I just want to shed some light a bit on like practice versus game mentality. And because I know this ties right in with consistency, finding a rhythm during the week leading up to games and not just game days. But obviously the pro schedule is hard on the body and the mind. But I think despite what level people are at, they need to find a balance. So in your opinion, how should people approach that, right? Like to give themselves the best balance and consistency. What are some ways you like to keep consistent sort of week to week with your guys?
Yeah, and you'll hear me talk about it a lot, but it really is preparation. You should have a consistent plan of preparation, and preparing for success is a huge aspect of it. For the most part, our weekly agenda isn't changing that much, and having that consistency to fall back on is huge. Um, if you're a goalie in youth hockey, you practice on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you probably want to start scheduling your workouts for a Monday, a Wednesday, or a Friday. That way, you're not exhausted come that day, and really detail in on certain things like, okay, how much am I eating? Before games, what am I eating before practice? What's my mindset too? And that's a huge piece of practice versus games is the mindset because. A lot of people say you need to practice the way you play, and I agree with that to a certain extent. But there are certain things that you need to make changes to when you go from a practice to a game as far as mindset and,
Hmm.
and approach. And I think a lot of people, part of why they tire out is because they don't make that adjustment from a practice to a game. But yeah, I think for younger guys, as far as consistency, it's not going into every week thinking, okay, I need to change 5 things and they need to be changed in that week. Pick 1 or 2 things that you want to work on during the week and really be consistent with focusing in on those things. If you want to work on skating, really focus in on skating drills, really make an extra effort to work on your skating and your strides and your movement and not worry about other things so much. And I think that's the cool thing about practice is you can really dial it in and focus on 1 or 2 things with your goalie
Hmm.
coach. Don't pick 10 things and hit them all for 5 minutes. Find 2, 3 things that you really want to be consistent with and just follow through and make a game plan for that week for that thing.
Hmm.
And I think practice is a great way to do that because in practice you can replicate the scenario you want. You can make the drill that you want. Whereas in a game, you can't decide what types of plays are coming at you. But practice, you have those. You can control those types of variables. Okay, you can make it. Do you want to be a controlled rush? Do you want it to be, 2-on-1? What do you want? And that's the cool thing about practice is you can really tweak those types of things and play around with your drills. And if you're focusing on 1, 2 things, it becomes very clear what you need to work on. So just for me, that's a big piece to it. Is not going into a week or even a game that you got to work on 4 or 5 things. Just pick 1 or 2 things that you really want to focus in on.
I think that week to week, I personally like to have some sort of a consistent routine with some things like off ice, some things like conditioning on ice. And I think that's important, but also week to week, we need to sort of figure out what's the most important things that we need to change and not change a million things, right? Like we're not going to change everything overnight. And I think over the course of a season, you work up to sort of like a championship mode. And every week you chip away and it's a little bit up and it's a little bit down. um, here and there. But, what's sort of maybe some advice that you can give some people in terms of like, what exactly should they look for to change? You know what I mean? Like evaluating the weekend on Sunday or Monday, you evaluate yourself. You say, hey, so and so I didn't do this or that. What to you is a way that you sort of give weight to some of the most important things and kind of sort through all the things you need to work through.
For sure, and I think the first thing is I'd never, if I was a goalie, I'd recommend never watching your film the day of because you're going to be extremely, the emotions are raw, and you look at it with a very biased point of view. And I think if you can wait a day or two and digest it, and then step away from it, and even have someone else look at the film as well, then that's a big piece to it because you want to take the emotion out of it sometimes because a lot of times that will get in the way of, oh, I really shouldn't have had that, or I really should have had that. A lot of times we think like, oh, I could have had that puck when, you know, would it hurt us to think maybe our ego gets in the way, but just to think like, no, that was a good goal, and stick tap to him. But
Hmm.
as far as when you want to work on things like that, I think that you want to find, like I said, two or three focal points that you can work on during that week. Whether it, like I said, finding a lane through traffic, beating passes on your feet, or just staying present in the moment. And also, if you're looking at end results like goals that are allowed, don't just focus on that split second where the goal is allowed, what led up to it. You know, um, I can give you a story about I had this kid who could not control any gut trap, which is like a shot off the chest or the jersey logo for
Hmm.
people that maybe aren't familiar with the gut trap. And all these coaches were thinking, oh, maybe it's his blocker is not, in the right place, or his glove isn't kind of being the breadbasket to seal the puck. When it was none of that. He was never getting his feet set when he dropped to his butterfly. He was never square to pucks. His chest was shrugged or was actually creating a ramp for the puck, and he was completely off angle to the puck. He was never square. So the puck was always hitting his chest at a weird angle, and it had nothing to do with his glove or his blocker. It had to do with everything in getting prepped for dropping to his butterfly. So I think you need to look at, the process leading up to results as well.
Hmm.
I think that would be the big piece to me is look at the process. I mean, if you've got 30 shots a game on average, that's 1 second from shot to release to either goal or rebound. That's 30 shots a game. That's 30 seconds. The other 59 and a half minutes, you're skating, you're moving around. So you need to really look at those things, not just what types of goals you're letting in.
I just want to pivot a bit though, to the recruiting process and just what you guys look for as coaches, and obviously you can give us a bit of an inside look into what maybe the head coach is looking for too, right? Just because I think most people don't really know exactly what they're looking for, right? Like how to check off the right boxes to move up to the next level. But for the people that don't know, there's a relatively large amount of turnover in pro at every level, meaning guys move around a lot. And if you don't do your job, you're sort of out the door and comes another guy looking for his opportunity. But I just want to briefly shed some light on, and we talked about it earlier, like how competitive the goalie landscape is getting, and maybe touch a bit on why you think the situation is so tight so people can get an idea of what to expect, so that way they're not like a deer in the headlights when they get there.
Sure. I mean, and the competitiveness to the goaltending position just at this point is now coming down to pure statistics. I mean, you have two roster spots at every level for a goalie, and look how many more you have for defensemen and forwards. So it's just the nature of the beast that there's going to be a higher compete level for goalies because there's less roster positions for them. So you're seeing a lot of, even this year, you're seeing a lot of guys in the SPHL with 50, 60 plus ECHL games. You're seeing guys even with AHL experience.
Hmm.
So it's becoming extremely competitive, and there's a lot of turnover because a lot of times too, and I think the biggest issue isn't goalies that jump up to the next level and think they can't handle it. It's goalies that go down a level and think they're too good for it.
Hmm.
And I think that sometimes can be one of the biggest reasons for such high turnover. But yeah, recruiting plays a huge piece to it. And I can jump into that if you want as well.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna lead into that. Like what exactly are you guys looking for when it comes to deciding if a guy sort of stays or goes, and maybe just some advice that you can give, to help guys stand out and prove themselves a bit to both coaches and their teammates, right? Like what are some common pitfalls rookies fall into that you guys hate to see?
Yeah, I think that's a big piece to it, and we look at a lot of times ego. You know, if you're a guy that comes into the locker room and you think you're going to control the locker room, it's not really the way it works. I mean, that the team is a democracy. You've got 18 guys, two goalies. I mean, there's a lot of different people in there, and the bottom line is you all need to sacrifice yourself for the greater good, and that's ultimately winning a championship. And a lot of guys can sometimes get caught up in how do I get to the next level? How do I do what's best for myself? And sometimes that self-minded ego can get in the way, and you want to obviously, if that's a cancer in the room, you want to remove that cancer. So we typically,
Mhm.
before we bring in guys, before we even look at their statistics, how many goals they're scoring, how many assists, what's their plus or minus, we call the coach and we're very upfront. What kind of person are we getting? Not a hockey player, but what kind of person? You know, because that's big to us. And you're spending, when you think about it in pro hockey, you're living with these people. It's not like you just go to the rink for 2 hours and that's that. You're living with them, you're traveling with them for long periods of time. So you want to make sure that the group of guys that you have is, like a brotherhood, like a family, because that's what you really ultimately need to win a championship. Um, so that's a big piece of the recruiting. Um, we look at, what's their compete level. What's their mindset when they go into games? Are they making stupid penalties because of selfish decisions, or are they doing things they should have? They blocking shots? Are they even if they're the first line guy, are they going down and doing the dirty work and getting pucks in the corner? Like we want to know those types of things. And we don't really care so much just about the intangibles. You're this height, you're this weight, you score this many goals, or you're this many plus or minus, or whatever it may be. You have to really look into the nitty gritty, and I think that's something that a lot of kids get lost on. They think, oh, if I'm, putting up 40 goals a year and 50 assists, I'm going to get scouted. Well, if word gets out that you're a selfish guy and it's me, 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 then
Mhm.
they're quickly going to write you off because at the end of the day, that doesn't work at the higher levels. There are plenty of other guys that can score 30, 40, 50 goals too, but also not have the same mindset as you. So that's a big piece to it. The most important thing is being a good person, being a good teammate, being coachable. That's really what it comes down to. Stats are important, obviously, too, but, you know, I think we hear a lot of stories about, bad people in the locker room, whatever it may be, and it really comes down to who the coach is allowing in the locker room. And we need to be really careful of who we're bringing into our team because our team in essence is our family. So I think that's a big piece to it. So and also dual sports. We that's more the college side, but they want to see people that are playing two sports and aren't playing hockey year round.
Really? That's interesting.
Yep. If you look at, I don't remember what year it was, but Urban Meyer for Ohio State, I think only recruited 4 players who played only football, and I think 48 kids that were dual sport athletes. And it goes into injury too, injury prevention. If you're playing one sport, you're overusing the same muscle groups, and there's a lot of times that there's a good chance of injury. You should, if you're ever curious, look into like the Tommy John surgery for baseball players and pitchers. There's kids that are 12 and 13 years old getting it now because they're playing 10, 11 months out of the year throwing. Pretty, and it's sad, honestly, too, because we think that you need to specialize and play hockey or baseball 24/7 when that's not the case at a young age too, especially. How many sports did you play growing up? Probably 3, 4, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. No, for sure. I mean, a little bit different than like I never played football, but I played like lacrosse, soccer, did some track, you know what I mean, stuff like that.
Yeah, and they're all things that you can also now pull to your game. Track and field, endurance, conditioning, speed. Lacrosse is like a lot of people say like hockey, but on grass. Um, and then all those other sports, hand-eye coordination, things like that. I mean, it's huge.
I want to just I really liked what you said there about there's a lot of players out there that can score 50 goals, but what's that one thing that separates you? And for me and sort of like my whole branding here is it's a very character driven brand, and I really believe in character and attitude because the landscape is getting so competitive that like you said, like somebody else who has a better mental approach, who fits in better with the team, they can do the same thing and be not be a cancer in the room. And it was something that I didn't realize as a rookie, and I think most kids don't. You come from like wherever, like I played Division 1, and then after playing in the league for like a year and sort of moving around, you really get to figure out like how important, you know, the locker room is, right? Because at the end of the day, we're going to war, right? Like this full grown men playing hockey, beating the crap out of each other, going out there trying to win. And if you don't feel like you can trust that guy next to you, if you're not willing to sacrifice for that guy next to you, then in my opinion, that's you could see it. You can even feel it when you play teams that just don't have that same connection. There's just the willingness to do whatever it takes to win for the guy beside you. And I think that as goaltenders, we need to approach that mentality more, right? Like it's a very powerful thing when your goalie's willing to do whatever it takes to win, and it is very inspiring, and it inspires magical efforts from your team. You know, not just being able to fit into a team, but when you finally get there, you actually have the mental capacity and the willingness to overcome challenges when they come and do whatever it takes, right? So I'm really glad that you sort of touched on that. I think that's a big part of pro. I think that the mental grind, the physical grind, doesn't matter who you are and how good you are. When you get there, it's a grind. And if you haven't developed that character, that good attitude to sort of figure out how to overcome obstacles, work with other people when things get hard, not to point fingers, to look in the mirror, I think those things can go a long way. But I just want to bridge a little bit with some of the concepts that we're talking about, right? Like the recruiting process, and even that leads right into developing a championship mentality, right? Like we sort of know how your guys work, and now we understand the pro goalie landscape a bit, and the recruiting process, a little through your eyes. But let's dive into the really good stuff, right? Some more specific championship conversation, right? I find that people who are champions generally have a lot of similarities. But to you, what is probably the biggest thing that separates regular goalies from champions?
I think when you boil it down, I mean, yeah, attitude's a big piece to it, but being just self-aware that you control your destiny. It's not the other team, it's not other players, it's you. And being self-aware gives you that freedom to understand that, you're in the driver's seat, you're gonna make it happen. Um, and just being, the championship mindset, you don't just have it, you learn it over time. Um,
For sure.
there were times where you don't feel like a champion, and there are days where you do feel like a champion, honestly. And part of it is how do you pull that out of yourself every day? Um, and a lot of that comes from your team. A lot of it comes from the course of the season. I mean, we purposely, and I know Coach Tertulio is really big on it. He purposely will put obstacles in their way. He'll make them do things in the beginning of the year, like they go out to this, like kind of like a boot camp almost, to see how you react as a team under pressure, who comes out as a leader, who comes up as a person, as the right hand man to step up, all these
Hmm.
little things that add up over a season. But I think to pinpoint it, if you really had to pick one thing that makes goalies successful or team successful, it's having a self belief in your destiny. That it's you who controls it,
Hmm.
and that includes cutting out what other people say, doubters, you want to call them haters, but just realizing that you control your destiny. We're really big on saying we'll play any team, any day, any place, any time, really. And that's what the championship mindset is. And it also includes, you don't take the last place team as lightly as the first place team. You approach every game, like you said, like you're going to war.